It was a cold, quiet evening when Henry Cole, the billionaire tycoon, stood by the window of his high-rise apartment. The city below twinkled with lights, but it felt distant, like it wasn't his world anymore. For so many years, he had been all about business, always pushing forward, never looking back. But tonight was different. Tonight, something had changed inside him. The door to his apartment opened quietly, and in walked his housekeeper, Marjorie, holding a small tray with a warm cup of tea. Henry didn't take it. Instead, he walked over to the picture on the wall, an old black and white photo of a child he hadn't seen in years. A child he never really got to know. His fingers brushed the glass frame. Eric, his son. Before we continue, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to this channel to support our growth, because this story is just getting started. Or so he thought. The truth was, Henry never really knew the boy. There had been chances, years ago, but Henry had always turned them away. And now it was too late. He'd been told that Eric was gone. No more chances, no more apologies. But then came Mila, a girl who looked so much like Eric that it made Henry's heart ache. Mila was asleep now, in the guest room. She wasn't his daughter by blood, but everything inside him knew she was family. As Henry stood there, staring at that photo, a small voice broke through his thoughts. "Daddy." It was Mila. She was standing in the doorway, a soft look on her face, eyes wide but full of trust. Henry turned. His throat tightened. "Yes?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mila shifted nervously, hands tucked behind her back. I'm hungry. Can I eat with you?" Her question hit Henry like a storm. She wasn't demanding. She wasn't crying for food, like so many kids might. She was simply asking. But there was something about the way she said it. Soft, unsure, almost as if she'd been taught that asking for something could be a risk. "Of course," Henry said quickly, his voice catching in his throat. Mila's eyes lit up, but Henry didn't notice. His mind raced, his heart pounding. Here was this little girl, this child who had already been through so much, standing before him with nothing but hunger, not for food, but for love, for connection, for someone to show her she wasn't alone. He was a billionaire. He owned buildings, businesses, luxury cars. He had everything, or so it seemed. But here, in this moment, he realized he had nothing until now. Nothing that mattered. Henry led her to the small dining table, where Marjorie had already set out pancakes and syrup. The simple, warm meal felt like a symbol of something more. A promise. As they sat down, Mila picked up her fork, but then, almost shyly, she looked at him. "You sure I can eat first?" Henry's heart swelled. "You don't have to ask," he said, his voice quieter now. "It's all yours." Mila smiled, her tiny hands eagerly cutting into the pancakes. She ate with the same carefulness, as though she had learned to savor every bite, knowing it might be gone too soon. She chewed slowly, looking up at him every now and then, her eyes full of questions he didn't have the answers to. And then, as if she couldn't hold it in any longer, she spoke again, her voice small but clear. "Daddy, will you stay with me now? For real?" Henry's chest tightened. His eyes blurred. He hadn't been ready for this. How could he answer her? He hadn't even been sure he was ready to be a father again. But here she was, asking for something he had denied for so many years. "I will," he whispered, not sure if he was talking to her or to himself. She smiled, a quiet smile, one that didn't need to be big or loud. It was enough to make Henry believe, for the first time in a long time, that maybe, just maybe, he could do this. Maybe he could stay. But as Mila finished her meal, her voice broke the silence again. This time, her words were softer, almost shy. "Do you think my daddy would have stayed with me?" The question landed like a weight on Henry's chest. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached across the table and took her small hand in his. "I think he would have," he said quietly. "He would have been proud of you." Mila nodded, satisfied with his answer, and leaned back in her chair, looking up at him with the same trusting eyes. And for the first time in a long time, Henry felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Before we continue, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to this channel to support our growth. Tell us where you are watching from in the comment section. The following days passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and small but significant moments. Henry had never expected his life to change so suddenly, and yet here he was, navigating the unfamiliar terrain of fatherhood, with a little girl who had no idea how much she had already done for him. Mila was quiet but curious. She spent her mornings painting pictures in the corner of the living room, her focus intense as she mixed colors and made up stories for each of her creations. In the afternoons, she followed Henry around the house, asking questions about everything, from how the fireplace worked to why the city looked so big from his study window. Henry had never thought much about the world through the eyes of a child. His days had been filled with meetings, business decisions, and expectations that always came with a price. But now, he found himself pausing, thinking twice before answering her simple questions. It felt strange, yet it also felt right. One evening, as Henry was sitting in his study, flipping through papers, he heard the soft tap on his door. "Come in," he called without looking up. Mila stepped inside, holding something behind her back. She was wearing the same oversized hoodie she always wore, but tonight, it looked like it might fit a little better, as if she was starting to feel more at home here. "I made something for you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry smiled, setting down his pen. "What did you make?" Mila pulled a small, crumpled piece of paper from behind her back. She handed it to him carefully, her fingers trembling just slightly. It was a drawing. Henry took the paper, studying it. At first glance, it looked like a child's doodle, rough lines and smudged edges. But as he looked closer, he saw what it was. It was a picture of a house, with the sun shining above it and a tree on the side. At the front of the house stood two figures, one tall, one small. "Who are they?" Henry asked softly, his heart skipping a beat. "Mama and Daddy," she said, pointing to the taller figure, then to the smaller one. Henry's throat tightened. She didn't say my or your, just Mama and Daddy. It was as if, in her own way, she had already decided. He cleared his throat, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll put this on the fridge. It's the best picture I've ever seen." Mila's face lit up, her eyes wide with pride. "Really?" she asked, her voice full of hope. "Really," he said, his voice thick. He reached out, pulling her into a gentle hug. In that moment, Henry felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just a picture, it was a sign that she was starting to trust him, that she was beginning to believe in the family he was trying to give her. But trust, as Henry knew, wasn't something that could be given freely. It had to be earned, and he had a long way to go. Later that evening, after Mila had gone to bed, Henry sat alone in the living room, staring at the drawing on the table. It was small, but it meant everything. Suddenly, the phone rang. He hesitated, unsure if he wanted to answer. It had been one of those days where everything felt heavy, but he knew he had to. "Hello," he said, his voice tired. "Mr. Cole, it's Gregory," came the familiar voice on the other end. "We've got a lead on the woman who was involved with Eric. Tasha Price. We need to talk." Henry's heart skipped. This was it. The past was catching up to him, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what came next. But he couldn't back down now. Not after everything he had promised. Not after everything Mila had already given him. "I'm listening," Henry said, his voice steady despite the tension rising inside him. "We found some records," Gregory continued. "Payments that might be linked to a network. It's worse than we thought, and we're getting closer to finding her." Henry stood up, his hand gripping the back of the chair. "Where is she now?" "We don't know yet, but we'll track her down." Henry's mind raced. He thought of Mila, the fragile little girl who had already seen too much of the darkness in the world. "Don't let her slip through the cracks, Gregory," he said, his voice sharp. "Find her, and when you do, I'll take it from there." After hanging up, Henry walked to Mila's room. The door was cracked open, and he peeked inside. She was asleep, her bear tucked under her arm, a soft smile still on her face, as if the world outside didn't exist. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her. "I'll protect you," he whispered, more to himself than to her. He knew he had a lot to fix, a lot to prove, but he would do whatever it took. For her. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension. The kind of tension that hangs in the air like the stillness before a storm. Henry had learned a lot about Mila in such a short time. Her little quirks, her fears, and her surprising strength. But there was still so much more to uncover. The more he saw, the more he realized how much she had been through, how much pain she had hidden behind those wide eyes. The sound of her laughter, even when it came, often felt too fragile. It was the kind of laughter that was guarded, as if she was afraid that if she let it out too much, it would be taken away again. That morning, as Henry walked through the house, he found Mila in the kitchen, carefully spooning cereal into a bowl. She was unusually quiet, her back to him as she poured the milk with steady hands. "Good morning," Henry said softly, walking up behind her. He didn't want to startle her, but he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in his chest. Something was off. Mila didn't turn around right away. Instead, she kept her focus on the bowl, her fingers tightening around the spoon. "Morning, Daddy," she said, her voice a little too soft. Henry could tell something was bothering her, but he didn't push. He sat down at the kitchen table, trying to keep things light. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked, watching her carefully. "Yes," she said quickly, but the lie was too easy. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the bowl in front of her. It was as if she was trying to disappear into the simplicity of the moment. Like if she could focus on the cereal, she wouldn't have to face what was inside her. Henry took a deep breath, leaning forward slightly. "Mila, you know you can talk to me, right?" he said gently. "About anything." For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the refrigerator in the background. Then, finally, Mila set the spoon down, her hands shaking just enough for Henry to notice. "Sometimes I think you'll leave," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Like the others." Henry's heart sank. He stood up and walked over to her, kneeling down to her level. Her eyes met his, full of a fear that was too old for someone her age. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly, his voice soft but unwavering. "Not like the others. You're safe with me." Mila didn't respond immediately. She just looked at him, her small face a mixture of doubt and hope. It was like she wanted to believe him, but the weight of her past was holding her back. "I won't ever leave you," Henry added, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I'm here. You're not alone." For a moment, it felt like time had slowed down. Mila's eyes softened, but she didn't speak. She simply leaned into him, just a little, as if she was testing the waters. Henry wrapped his arm around her, pulling her into a hug. She stiffened at first but then relaxed, just a little. It wasn't much, but it was progress. The doorbell rang, cutting through the quiet moment. Henry froze. His first instinct was to pull away, but then he remembered who he was. He wasn't that man anymore. He let go of Mila and walked to the door, his heart still racing. As he opened it, he saw Gregory standing there, his face grim. Behind him was a plain black car, the kind that signified something serious. "We found her," Gregory said without preamble. "Tasha Price. She's been spotted at a location we've been tracking." Henry's pulse quickened. This was it. "Where?" he asked, his voice steady but his mind already racing. "Lower East Side," Gregory replied, his tone flat. "We have to move quickly. She's more dangerous than we thought." Henry nodded, turning back to look at Mila, who was now standing in the kitchen doorway, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Mila," he said gently, his heart heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. "I need to go, but I'll be back soon. Stay here with Marjorie, okay?" She nodded, her lips pressed together tightly. "Be safe, Daddy." "I will," Henry promised, his voice tight. "I'm always safe when I'm coming back to you." As he closed the door behind him, the weight of the decision he had made settled heavily in his chest. The search for Tasha Price was more than just about catching a criminal. It was about protecting the little girl who had already taught him what it meant to be a father, what it meant to stay. Later that night, after a long and tense operation that ended with Tasha's arrest, Henry returned home. The weight of the day hung heavily on him, but there was something different in the air. Mila was waiting for him in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the couch, her bear resting beside her. When she saw him, her face broke into a smile, and she ran to him, her small arms wrapping tightly around his waist. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered, her voice full of relief. Henry bent down, lifting her into his arms. "Of course I did. I'm always coming back to you." As he carried her to the couch, he felt the quiet bond between them grow even stronger. They didn't need words. They just needed each other. Mila nestled her head against his chest, her tiny hand gripping his sleeve. "Daddy," she said, her voice sleepy. "Will you always stay?" Henry kissed the top of her head, his heart full in a way he had never felt before. "Yes, Mila," he whispered. "I'll always stay." And for the first time in years, he realized that he wasn't just holding her. She was holding him, too. The days after Tasha's arrest were quieter than Henry had expected. Despite the victory of securing Mila's safety, there was still a heaviness hanging over the house. Each morning, Henry felt the pull of his old life, the one that had been centered around his work, his empire, and the cold precision that had defined him. But every night, as he sat beside Mila, reading her favorite books. He realized that the world he once knew had shifted. Mila was different too. There was a softness in her now, something that had been missing when she first arrived. But the scars she carried, mental, emotional, were still there, lingering beneath the surface. It was like they both understood that this healing process wasn't a straight line. It was messy, and it wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. Henry woke early one Saturday morning to find Mila already awake, sitting by the window in the guest room. Her room now, with the pale green walls and the little yellow stars on her comforter. She was staring out at the city, her bear beside her, not moving. Henry stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. There was something about the way she looked, so small against the backdrop of the city skyline. The world was so big, but here she was, finding her place in it. "Mila," he called softly, stepping into the room. She turned to him, a small frown on her face. "I was thinking," she said, her voice tentative, "about my mom." The words hit Henry like a punch to the gut. He hadn't heard her mention her mother since she had arrived. He wasn't sure how to respond. "You don't have to talk about it," he said, walking over to her. He sat down on the edge of the bed, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I wasn't thinking about her like that," she said, almost too quickly. "I was just wondering if she ever thought about me, or if she even remembers me." Henry's heart broke at the vulnerability in her words. He wanted to promise her everything was going to be okay, but he knew that wasn't the truth. The scars from the past weren't something that could be easily erased, not by him, not by anyone. "Sometimes people, they don't know how to love us the way we need," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we aren't loved." Mila didn't say anything. She just nodded slowly, as though she understood, even if she didn't fully believe it yet. "You've got me now," Henry said, his voice firm but soft. "And I'm never going to leave you. You don't have to wonder anymore." She looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face. For the first time since she had come to live with him, Henry saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, a hope that he hadn't seen before. "Okay," she whispered. "I think I can believe that." Later that morning, Henry took Mila to the park. It was a crisp day, the air sharp with the promise of winter, but the sunlight was still bright, and the leaves had turned shades of gold and amber. Mila was excited to see the ducks at the pond, but as they walked toward the water, Henry could see the weight of her thoughts still pressing on her. "You okay?" he asked as they paused near the edge of the water. "Yeah," she said, but it wasn't convincing. "Just thinking about everything." Henry turned to her, his eyes soft. "You don't have to think about everything right now. Just enjoy today." Mila looked up at him, her lips slightly curled in a small, uncertain smile. "I'm trying," she said, her voice quieter than usual. He crouched down to her level, looking into her eyes. "You're doing more than trying, Mila. You're doing it. You're living it." She smiled a little more at that, the tension in her shoulders easing. "I'm glad I have you," she said, her words simple but full of meaning. "And I'm glad I have you," Henry replied, his voice thick with emotion. That evening, Henry found himself sitting in his study, staring at the papers spread out before him. It was time to make the next big decision. The decision about the future of his company, about the Cole Foundation, and about what kind of man he wanted to be going forward. He had spent his entire life building an empire, but now, for the first time, he was questioning everything. He thought about the quiet moments with Mila, the mornings spent over pancakes, the evenings spent reading, the simple joy in her laughter. He thought about the promise he had made to her, that he would never leave, that he would always stay. But there was something bigger at play now, something that pulled at him. It wasn't just about protecting Mila anymore. It was about creating a world where kids like her didn't have to suffer, where no child had to feel like they were invisible, like they didn't matter. Henry picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't dialed in years. "Trevor," he said when the voice on the other end answered. "I need to talk to you about the future of Cole International." The following week was a whirlwind. Henry met with his advisors, made decisions that would change the trajectory of his company, and even scheduled a few meetings with child advocacy groups. But through it all, the one constant was Mila. As the days passed, she became more comfortable, more certain of her place in the world. She still had her moments. Moments when the past came rushing back, when the fear and doubt crept in, but Henry was always there to reassure her. One night, as they sat together on the couch, Mila looked up at him, her eyes full of something that Henry had never expected. "Do you think we're a family?" she asked quietly, the words coming so easily, as though it was the most natural question in the world. Henry didn't need to think about it. He looked at her, his heart full. Yes, Mila, we're a family, and I wouldn't have it any other way. The winter nights grew longer, and Henry found himself in the rhythm of his new life. Each day brought new challenges, but there was something about the steady beat of Mila's presence in his life that made everything feel right. The house, once too large and silent, now had a warmth that couldn't be measured in temperature alone. It was in the laughter at breakfast, in the quiet moments spent reading together, in the way Mila's footsteps echoed down the hallway like the heartbeat of the home. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, the past came knocking again. One cold evening, Henry received a call that would change everything. The caller ID read Marion Hayes. He hadn't spoken to his family attorney in weeks, but he knew that whenever Marion called, it was never for small talk. Henry. Her voice was sharp, but there was an undercurrent of concern. There's something you need to know. We've just received information about Tasha. Henry felt his stomach tighten. What now? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She's in the wind, Marion said. But we've uncovered something unexpected. She's been working with a network that's been involved in more than just child trafficking. We're talking about underground adoption rings, Henry. People have been hiding kids in plain sight, selling them, moving them, and Mila was on their list. Henry felt the blood drain from his face. It was like everything he'd feared was coming true. Mila had never been just a victim of a bad situation. She had been caught in something much bigger, something darker. And now, the people who had exploited her were still out there. What does this mean? Henry asked, his voice barely a whisper. It means we're closer to finding the rest of the kids. And it means Tasha is just the tip of the iceberg. You've got the evidence, Henry. We've got to act on it. Fast. The days that followed were filled with urgency. Henry, along with Gregory and his team, gathered everything they could. Files were examined. New leads were followed. And while they fought to bring down the people who had hurt Mila, and so many others, Henry couldn't shake the feeling of responsibility weighing on him. At night, when Mila was asleep, Henry would stand in her room, looking at the stars she had painted on the walls. He had promised her he would protect her. He had promised to always stay. But the darkness of the world kept pushing back, and the shadows loomed larger than ever. One evening, after another long day of meetings, Henry returned home to find Mila sitting at the kitchen table, drawing again. The lights were dim, and there was an air of peace in the room despite everything that was happening outside. Daddy, Mila looked up at him, her small hands clutching a piece of paper. I want to give you something. Henry raised an eyebrow as he walked over to her. What's this? She handed him the drawing. It was a picture of a house with 2 stories, a large front yard, and a swing set. In the middle of the house, a small stick figure stood with a teddy bear. It's us, Mila said, her voice full of hope. I made it for you so you won't forget. Henry's heart tightened as he looked at the picture. It was simple. It was childlike, but it was everything he had ever wanted. I won't forget, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I won't ever forget. And in that moment, he knew that everything he was fighting for, everything he was risking, was worth it. For Mila, for the life they were building together. The weeks passed in a blur of action. They tracked down every lead, every person involved in the underground adoption ring. Henry was relentless, refusing to let the past steal another child's future. And through it all, Mila stayed by his side. There were moments when she struggled, when the weight of her past threatened to pull her back into the darkness. But Henry was there, always there, to pull her out. One afternoon, as they walked home from school, Mila took his hand. She looked up at him with a smile that was both shy and confident at the same time. Daddy, she said, her voice quiet, but filled with certainty. I think I'm ready to let go of the past. Henry squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with pride. You're stronger than you know, Mila. The breakthrough came on a cold Tuesday afternoon. Gregory called, his voice steady but urgent. We've got them, he said. The rest of the children. We're bringing them in. Henry felt a rush of relief mixed with fear. He had known this day was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. He stood in the hallway, looking up at the pictures on the wall, the family pictures, the ones of Eric, the ones of Mila. The path ahead was still uncertain, but Henry was no longer the man who ran from hard decisions. He was the man who faced them, head on, with love in his heart. And just as he was about to step out, Mila appeared, standing in the doorway, her small frame silhouetted by the light from the living room. "Daddy, where are you going?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Henry knelt down to her level, his hands on her shoulders. "I'm going to finish something important, Mila. But you're not alone. I'll always come back to you. You're my home." She smiled softly, the trust in her eyes never wavering. "I know." The days after that were filled with legal battles, but Henry wasn't alone. Mila was with him every step of the way. As the final court hearings unfolded, Henry stood firm, the weight of responsibility heavy but no longer terrifying. Mila's adoption was finalized, and as they stood together, holding hands in the courtroom, Henry couldn't help but feel like a new man. He had done it. He had kept his promise to her. And then, when it was over, he did what he had always done. He took Mila to the park. This time, they sat on a bench, looking out at the world, knowing they had built something that couldn't be broken. "You know, Mila," Henry said, his voice steady. "Sometimes people think that love is about giving everything you have, but it's not. It's about being there. It's about showing up." Mila looked up at him, her small hand in his. "I know," she said softly, "because you always show up for me." And in that moment, Henry realized that love wasn't just something you gave. It was something you built. It was the thing that made everything else possible. It had been a year since the adoption had been finalized. A year since everything had shifted, since Mila had officially become part of Henry's life. A year of finding rhythm in the chaos. It was incredible how much could change in a short span, how love could heal so deeply and quickly. Henry had always been someone who prided himself on control, over his empire, his work, and even his heart. But since Mila, he had learned a different kind of control. The kind that let go, that embraced uncertainty, and still found peace in it. It was an early morning in late spring. The sun hadn't quite reached its peak, casting a soft glow through the curtains. The sound of pancakes sizzling filled the kitchen as Henry flipped them with precision, a habit born of many years of boardroom meetings and deadlines. But today, his thoughts weren't on contracts or deals. They were on the girl upstairs, the one who had brought light into his life. The sound of footsteps came down the hallway, and then Mila appeared in the kitchen, her hair still messy from sleep, wearing a faded hoodie that looked too big on her. She had a quiet confidence about her now, a stark contrast to the girl who had arrived in his life. Guarded, unsure, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Morning, Daddy," she said, her voice thick with sleep but warm. She looked at the pancakes, her eyes lighting up. "Is that for me?" "Always for you," Henry replied, handing her a plate. Mila sat down at the table reaching for the syrup with a quiet intensity, as if she were savoring not just the food but the simple act of being allowed to eat, of being allowed to have something that belonged to her. Henry watched her for a moment before speaking, his voice soft. "You ready for today?" She didn't look up from her plate, but nodded. "Yes, I'm going to tell them what I want to be when I grow up." Henry's heart fluttered. The last few weeks had been full of moments like this, small, but important ones. Mila had been talking about the future more, about school, about her dreams, about growing up. The dreams were simple, yet profound. To be a teacher, a doctor, maybe both. She didn't know yet, but Henry knew one thing. She would be anything she wanted. "Sounds like a good plan," he said with a smile. Mila looked up from her food, her eyes suddenly serious. "Do you think I'm ready, Daddy?" "Ready for what?" Henry asked, his voice gentle. "For everything. For the world." Her voice wavered just slightly, like she was testing the waters, unsure if she was allowed to believe she could have it all. Henry placed his hand on hers, squeezing gently. "You've been ready for a long time, sweetheart. The world better be ready for you." Later that day, after the morning routine, Henry and Mila found themselves walking through Central Park. Spring had fully arrived, the trees in bloom, the air filled with the sound of laughter from children playing. The scene felt normal, almost too normal, like everything that had come before this moment. The struggles, the pain, the questions had never happened. But Henry knew better. Those memories were the foundation of what they had now. As they walked, Mila reached up and grabbed his hand, her fingers wrapping around his with a firmness that seemed to say, "I'm not letting go this time." It was a quiet moment, but it spoke volumes. "Daddy," Mila said, her voice soft. "I've been thinking a lot." "About what?" Henry asked, looking down at her, his heart already bracing for whatever was coming. "What if I told people about my story? Would it be okay?" Henry stopped in his tracks, a slight surprise flashing through him. He had known this day would come, but the reality of it was still a lot to process. Mila had always been so guarded about her past, never speaking much about the things she had endured. "You're thinking about telling your story?" Henry asked, kneeling to her level so he could look into her eyes. Mila nodded. "I think it might help other kids like me. I want them to know they're not invisible." Henry's chest tightened, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. He hadn't realized how much she had internalized over the past year, how much she had quietly carried. "You know," he started slowly, "there's strength in telling your story, but you don't have to do it unless you're ready. It's your story, Mila, and when you're ready, we'll do it together." Mila smiled, a small, knowing smile that only someone who had learned to trust could give. "I think I'm ready, Daddy, but I need you with me. I'll always be with you," Henry said, his voice firm, full of the promise that had always been there, but now felt even more true. And that moment, simple yet profound, marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, the beginning of sharing their truth with the world. That evening, as they sat together on the couch, the weight of the world seemed a little lighter. Mila, leaning against him, her head resting on his shoulder, glanced up at him. "Daddy," she whispered. "Yes, sweetie. Do you think Eric would have wanted me to be happy?" Henry closed his eyes for a moment, the question taking him by surprise. He had never really thought about it in those terms, about what Eric, the man who had once been his son, might have wanted for her. But in that moment, the answer came to him, quiet but certain. "Yes," Henry whispered back, kissing the top of her head. "He would have wanted you to be happy, Mila, and he would have been so proud of you." Mila smiled softly, her small hand curling around his. "I think he'd like it here." Henry's heart swelled with pride and love. "I think so too." As the night settled in, Henry knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as father and daughter, as a family, and that was more than enough. As we come to the end of this powerful journey with Henry and Mila, we are reminded of something incredibly important. Family is not always about blood. It's about the love, the courage, and the willingness to stand by someone, no matter their past, no matter how broken they may seem. Henry, once a man driven by wealth and power, learned that the truest form of strength comes from opening his heart and letting someone in. Mila, who had spent so much of her young life feeling invisible, found her voice and her place in a world that had once seemed so unkind. Together, they found not just a home, but a family built on trust, vulnerability, and healing. The lesson here is simple but profound. Healing is possible when we choose to show up for each other. In a world where so many of us feel alone, it's the connections we make, the love we give, and the courage we have to face our past that shape our future. Mila and Henry remind us that it's never too late to rewrite our story. No matter how far we've fallen, no matter how broken we may feel, there's always room for hope, for change, and for love to heal what's been lost. So, as you reflect on this story, remember that no matter where you are in your journey, you are worthy of love, of second chances, and of the strength to rise above any challenge that comes your way. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more tales of hope, healing, and transformation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Join me on this journey, where we explore the power of love and the resilience of the human spirit, because there's always more to learn, more to feel, and more to discover together. Thank you for being part of this community. Remember, your story isn't over. You have the power to shape it. Until next time.